Just under 2 years. We went from one child to 8 children in our home. And that was a shock. But it is amazing what you are capable of doing when you absolutely have to do it.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Produced by Media Minefield, the show is hosted by Christy Peel, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
Vicki Swenson's Flip Your Script story will leave you stunned and inspired and asking yourself, where did she find the strength? At least that's what I thought as I watched Vicki navigate a nightmare. And I have to give you a little background before Vicki joins us. Her family was thrust into the local and national spotlight in 2006. Vicki's sister, Teri Lee, and her boyfriend, Tim Hawkinson, were murdered by Teri's ex. I'm intentionally choosing not to say his name. He doesn't deserve it. He's sitting in a jail cell, which is right where he belongs. This wasn't, though, the first tragedy for the family. At the time of the murder, Teri was a single mom to 4 kids because her husband had died in a car accident. Vicki and her husband opened their home and took in Teri's 4 kids. And Vicki became an advocate pushing for tougher domestic violence laws. When all this happened, I was a TV reporter and covered the story from the day of the tragedy throughout the trials and beyond. And I got to know Vicki and her family quite well. And she has always been so generous in sharing her story, and I'm really thrilled she's willing to talk about where we are now, years later, on the podcast. Vicki, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Christy, for having me.
So let's go back to 2006. You're a volleyball coach, a mom. At the time, you have 3 children, correct?
Yes, and I was teaching and coaching and living the life that I thought I was meant to live.
A very normal, very private life.
Absolutely.
So you get this call. You knew that your sister had been having some problems with an ex. The police knew that. She'd been threatened. And you get this call that she's been murdered. Obviously, I mean, I can't imagine the grief, but then there's the 4 kids, your nieces and nephews. How quickly did you go from, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, to I gotta step in and help these children? Was that days? Was that hours? How do you navigate those 2 things at the same time?
Well, that's a great question. And, thankfully, my sister and I, Teri and I are 2 years apart. And so we grew up together. We were very close. She was very close to my children, and my husband and I are very close to her children. And those are the kinds of conversations that after her husband passed away that we had. And, we asked each other who would raise each other's children if something were to happen. And I remember we both had this moment of tragedy isn't going to strike twice in her life. But we have to have this conversation. And so from that moment on, there was peace and comfort knowing we would look out for each other. So when I got that call Friday morning, September 22nd of 2006, immediately, my thoughts went to my sister's 4 kids. Set aside your own grief and shock of losing your sister, but it was immediate of what can we do to help those kids.
And not just taking in 4 kids, it's dealing with the tragedy the kids have survived twice. And you have your own grief and your parents and your family, and you have a very close extended family. And you chose to do it publicly. Was that a choice that you and Eric, your husband, decided to make? Or is that a choice that was kind of thrust on you and suddenly here you are with news cameras all over?
Well, we sat hunkered down at my parents' lake place and we turned on the news, and some of it was not quite accurate. And so we made a decision early on, if my sister's story is going to be told, we are going to be the ones to tell it, because we wanted the truth out there. And we were kind of thrust into that spotlight, but we made a decision that her story is going to be told with or without us. And it was very clear. And so, because there was so much public interest in this and even on a national level. And so we decided we were going to be the ones to tell her story.
And you did it beautifully and courageously and bravely for so long. And then there's the initial story, and then there's the court case, which carries this whole thing on for a long time. And you have to deal with the publicity and the news and all of that again while trying to keep these 4 kids moving forward. How did you navigate that?
That was a big challenge because we knew that going into the criminal court that they would be asked to testify. The courts made it very clear. But early on, we were asked if we would be interested in working with the defense on a plea bargain or some sort of an arrangement so that we didn't have to go through the court system. And, my dad was 74 maybe at the time, and he spoke up. He's not a man of many words, but when Burns speaks, you listen. And he spoke up in court and said, I deserve to die and to leave this earth knowing that my grandchildren will never have to go to a parole hearing and that this man is locked up for good. And we're not talking 25 years with a chance of parole. I mean, locked up for good. And so we decided as a family to sit through the criminal court and to go through the trial, and knowing that, my oldest niece would have to testify. And it was hard. It was very hard. But at the end of the day, we are a strong family and we really heavily leaned on each other.
And they're now leaning on you as the aunt, the de facto mother in their lives at this point. Was it the family that got you through it? Was the strong family, the support of, and I know you have some very close friends. Is that, looking back on it now, what gave you the strength? Is that what you drew upon in those difficult days?
Absolutely. I think when there is tragedy, you really find out how much good there is in the world. And we have been incredibly blessed, not just within the support of our family, but our friendships, our relationships with people in the community. We had so much support and love surrounding us, and it made it so much easier. And looking back, you realize how incredibly fortunate you are to have had that, because I don't know how we could have gotten through that without that love and support of even strangers, not just the people in our circles, but even strangers. I think my sister's story really resonated with a lot of women. And because I think we have this perception of what an abused woman looks like, or where she lives, or what her education level is. And what we've learned, of course, what I learned the hard way, is that domestic violence crosses all of those racial lines, socioeconomic lines. It doesn't matter if you live in the suburbs or in rural America. Domestic violence is everywhere, and it can happen to any single one of us. And I think that was the biggest shock that I learned was, wow, I am not immune to this tragedy.
And she did everything right. She called the police and she did all of the things that, we're supposed to do. And yet she ended up getting killed. And that inspired you then to change some things. And you became this domestic violence law changing. You're out there with, legislators, and that must have been difficult as well. And yet, do you feel like it was all worth it because you did good? You maybe helped other people?
I think it was the love of my sister that motivated me, certainly, because I do believe she did everything that we ask women to do. And can we be better as a society? Absolutely, we can. But here's a case where a woman really did follow each part of the book, and she's dead. And so then you look at, well, how can we make changes? How can we prevent this? And if it saves one life, then it's worth it to me. I did not want my sister to die in vain. And so that was a big motivating piece for me. And changing legislation. Was it perfect? No. But did it help? Absolutely. I remember the sheriff, Bill Hutton from Washington County, called me a few years later, and he said, Vicki, we had a similar situation to your sisters. And I want you to know this is what we did and this is how we handled it. And we went and picked the guy up. And right there, I just sunk in my chair and I thought, thank you, God, for sparing this woman's life. I do believe lives have been saved as a result of her death. And that is something that I cling to.
And you chose, your story wasn't just locally. I watched the Dateline with Hoda Kotb that you were part of. And it was, the police calls are on there. It's all out there and it's powerful. And going back, looking at it now with all this perspective, are you glad you went as public as you did, even as hard as that was?
I am thankful that her story has been told over and over again, because again, I can't go back and change the past. But I can change from this day forward. And I think for me, it was all about being proactive and how can we create a better world and a better community and families for these women and children. And so that was a huge motivating piece for me. I would do it all over again. Dateline, we were on national television a handful of times. And I go back to, it was my sister. I think people couldn't turn the TV off when they saw her because, again, we have this perception of what an abused woman looks like. And perhaps she wasn't it in other people's minds. And I still think we have a long way to go, but I do think lives have been saved.
And you, August 2006, your children, but also the students and the volleyball kids that you coach, they know you, but you're unknown. And then pretty soon there's Extreme Home Makeover in your front yard, and you probably couldn't go to the grocery store without getting recognized. And this is nothing that you asked for. This wasn't a choice that you made for all of this to happen to you. You said yes to telling the story, but was it hard to take? You got so much help. Was that hard for you to say, you know what? Even though I don't want any of this to happen and I'm not a victim here, I want the story out, and that means opening up and saying yes to help. Was that hard? I've heard from other people that, saying yes to help is difficult.
That was hard. We lived in a fishbowl, and as happy and proud as I am that my sister's story has been out there and told over and over again, with that comes, you lose a little bit of your privacy. And so, yes, there are still times, and the show that occurred in 2007, and still to this day, I have people say, "Hey, I know who you are. I watched your show." I've been all over the country with my volleyball girls, and this woman stopped me in Atlanta, and I thought she recognized me from the volleyball gym. She said, "No, I will never forget your story." And she said, "I watched your Extreme Makeover show." She said, "I know exactly who you are." And those are the warm, fuzzy, like, wow, that's really nice. There was some unexpected disruptions in our lives that weren't as fun, but it was part of the territory, and we understand that. I think the strangest thing, well, there were many, but people would just knock on our door. And someone said, "Hi, I'm here from California. We watched your show. Could we come in and see your house?"
What?
Yeah, that was probably one of the most bizarre things that happened. And that happened a handful of times. But I think, and I chose to view it in a positive way. Yes, I thought it was strange, but I think because people cared so much, and I go back to the story in the life of my sister, that it resonated with people for whatever reason. It spoke to them. And I think people have a kind and caring heart. And maybe I'm naive and they were just super nosy, but I really tried to view these things from a place of just really good intentions and a place from love.
And in the middle of all of that, you're raising then what turns into 8 children because you decided to have another child in the midst of that. And so you go from 3 to 8 in like a matter of, what was it, 12 months, 13 months? You went from 3 to 8?
Just under 2 years. We went from one child to 8 children in our home. And that was a shock. But it is amazing what you are capable of doing when you absolutely have to do it. I remember when the twins were born in 2005 and throwing myself back on the couch thinking, I am so busy. This is crazy. I have 3 kids and how am I ever going to get through this? And then 10 months later, I had 7 kids and you get through it. You find a way. You draw on those daily moments of inspiration. And it is amazing what you are capable of doing. You are stronger, absolutely stronger than you think you are.
Now that you're the older kids, Samantha's older, she's on her own, she's volleyball famous, a proud Minnesota Gopher, and has done all sorts of things for volleyball, and little girls look up to her, and you're, probably to some people just Samantha's mom, and not Teri's sister, because this is a kind of a new chapter in watching Samantha, and it's fun to cheer her on from afar as she continues to play professional volleyball. What has she said to you about those times? Mom, I can't believe you did that. Or Mom, what were you thinking? Or Mom, I'm so proud of you. It must have really, since she was the oldest, she saw it the clearest perhaps. Or is it not hit her? Because that's just her normal. Sometimes kids that, it's like, well, this is just how it is. This is just what we do.
I think for Samantha, because she was so close in age to her cousins and they were together so often that it was almost pretty normal for her. Of all the kids, your immediate focus obviously goes to my sister's 4 kids. My goodness, they're orphaned. They've lost both of their parents now. But there was one day where I remember thinking, what about her? She's given up not just her physical space, her bedroom, her, spot at the table. I mean, everything, but she's given up her parents as she knew them. She's given up this life as she knew it. And how is she adjusting? And I'm really proud of her. I think she's handled it just beautifully. And I think in part it is because she is an athlete. And, even Eric and I being collegiate athletes, there's this mental toughness to you that you have this belief that you really can get through anything. And I'm really proud of her and how she's handled it. It is a change. I am known as Sam's mom. Now I'm stopped at the mall and, people want a picture and I step aside, or I'm often the one taking the picture, so that they can get a picture with her. I think my favorite thing, we were just in Denver, just a few months ago, and this girl texted her mom that, and the mom shared the text with me. She said, "Oh my gosh, I just saw Sam Seliger Swenson's mom." And I thought, wow. But yeah, it's a refreshing change. And I'll be really honest, there were days I didn't want to leave the house. I stopped going to Christmas parties. I stopped hanging out in large groups because even though people are really well intentioned, my identity isn't this tragedy. And I felt like for a period of time, that's all people wanted to talk about. And that was a really hard adjustment for me. So as seasons grow and seasons change and we all learn and mature and age, that is a blessing for me to have that part of it, not completely in the past, but just a sign that we've moved on.
And thinking about moving on, you've been raising kids for a long time, and your youngest is, doesn't need diapers changed and that kind of thing anymore. And you're starting to see maybe your next chapter that might just be about Vicki and not about being there for all these other people. What does that look like for you? Because you haven't been able to have that thought for yourself in a long time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. For so long, it has been just survival mode. And, at one point we had 5 kids in braces and, 5 kids in therapy and 5 kids in sports and multiple sports. And now we're down to 3 kids, 2 in braces. And so I'm laughing because my 8th one is coming up and we're putting braces on the 8th child. But think of how many orthodontics appointments that is. It's crazy. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there will be a day, people would say, wow, your hands are so full. And my only response was, I would rather have them full than empty. And I am thankful that we are the ones that raised those kids. We weren't perfect. We screwed up plenty, and we've screwed up with our own kids, of course, but we absolutely did our best. I don't know what it's going to look like when our youngest leaves. I am excited to reinvent myself. I think that when, one chapter closes and you're finished with it, you start a new chapter. And I don't know what that next chapter looks like for me, but I'm excited to figure it out.
And people that are listening that might be thrust into something that they weren't expecting, that they have that moment of, gosh, do I do this or do I not do this? And you've talked about being able to do more than you think. Are there other nuggets, other takeaways that you've learned now that that some of those really difficult choices are behind you? Doesn't mean the difficult days aren't behind you, because we all have them, and you certainly do as well. But what advice would you have for someone who's right in the middle of that?
Accept any and all offers of help. People want to help you. And I think by nature, and Eric and I certainly were no different, we are very proud, independent. We can do things ourselves. We were always the ones helping other people. And this was a situation where we knew we would fail if we tried to do this alone. And we thankfully had so much support from our friends and our family. We had Eric's friends driving the boys to 6 a.m. hockey practices at 2 different locations before school started. We had other friends coming over, and one had organized, for the first year, a weekly meal. People want to help. And when you say no, I've learned that it's hurtful. Because you're closing off that person's desire to help you. And it really is we're in this together, right? And I think people feel good. We all feel good when we help each other. And so I think part of that is being able to say yes and to receive that help.
It's a great point. And when people have given you or made offers of help, is it more helpful when they say, I'm bringing over a meal today, than saying, hey, call me if you need anything? That specific help is better, right?
Absolutely. It's so open-ended. Hey, I'm here for you. If you need me, call me. Well, we aren't going to call. None of us are good at asking. And I think one of the greatest things, one of our colleagues did was she organized, and now there are websites that do this for you, but she created a spreadsheet, and it was just, people signed up without me even knowing, on things, mowing our lawn, snow removal, laundry. Sometimes people just came and sat with me, but for meals, she said, you're not even allowed in the house, because then you'll spend 2 hours talking to Vicki, and Vicki doesn't have 2 hours. And so she arranged for things to be dropped off at the door. And it just, to have that point person, for her to organize that help was such a gift. And I didn't have to ask for any of it. It just happened.
And there's no way for you to say thank you to all those people. Have you tried?
We tried. I remember, and it was this crazy picture. Eric's best friend, Matt, is a professional photographer. And we thought, you know what? We have sent a Christmas card every single year. And 2006 is not going to be any different. And so we marched all of the kids. We had 7 at the time. So this is just months removed from the kids moving into our home and losing their mom. We marched into his studio, and at the end, he said, okay, now everybody, do a silly pose. Well, that's the one we ended up with. And we sent that out to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that we had kept their names and address. But just, and with a nice thank you, but there really is no way we can possibly. And so I think for us, the phrase pay it forward is really important. And so that is my way of showing my gratitude is, to continue to try to pass forward what they passed on to us.
And you experienced it in such a short amount of time, the worst, I mean, the darkest and the most overwhelming. You saw the best in people and the worst in people. You lived both sides of that. Have you been able to get to a place where you're living more in the middle? I mean, you went from the highs and the lows, and your life was such a roller coaster for so long. Is your life now kind of dull, for lack of a better word? I mean, it's just kind of like, okay, well, here's another day. And the days that are boring are probably such beautiful to you because there is no big high and big low. It's another day. And I know what I'm in for today.
There was a period of time where I thought, and this is not a healthy way to live your life, but there was a period of time where I would wake up and I would drive the kids to school, 3 different locations, come home. I had toddlers, a couple days, drive them to preschool. I had a baby. I would grocery shop. I would come home. I would get dinner started. I would coach volleyball. I would come home and I would go to bed and think, okay, I survived. And then I remember the last thought I had before falling asleep was, oh my gosh, I have to do this all again tomorrow. And those were hard days. Those were really, really hard days. And we all suffered, and it was painful and difficult, but eventually you go from changing your mindset to, I have to do this and I have to get through the day, to finding the joy in the small things. I remember driving to Indiana from Chicago for a Gopher volleyball match, and just driving around with 2 girlfriends and just looking at the trees in the fall and how beautiful it was. And I thought, you know what? I have grown so much, because 5 years ago, I never would have stopped to look at what God has created and to just pause and say thank you for the beauty around me. And I do that often now because my life has changed so much. And, Taylor was the first to leave the house and to go off to college. And we dropped her off at Marquette on Sunday. And someone asked me, at what point did you feel the difference in going from 8 kids to 7 kids? And I said, by Tuesday. I remember Tuesday thinking, there is one less person to feed, one less person to look out for, one less. And then it was, well, now I only have 5 kids at home. And people would look at me like I'm crazy. I only have 5 kids at home. And now 3 kids is nothing. It's wonderful. I feel like we are more present in the moment, and it's great, but I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't do things any differently.
That's what's so fascinating about listening to all the different stories in the podcast and exploring that the flip your script kind of concept, is that if we would have gone back to when you had 3 kids in August of 2006 and said, you should be more present, Vicki. You should go outside and look at the leaves, and you should really believe that this is a gift from God this day. You would have been like, no, this is hard. And now 3 kids in your house, and you have such a different mindset. And the bummer is that it takes the tragedy, it takes the hard stuff to really be able to embrace what was always there all along. And that is one of the, gift isn't the right word because it's such a terrible tragedy, but that is the bright side, the joy that it is there, because it changes your mindset.
It does change your mindset, and you are forever changed. And I think tragedy can absolutely bring out the best in people. And you have to find the blessings in it. And there are blessings in it. I am more present. I have deeper, stronger relationships. First and foremost with God. There's nothing to draw you closer to God than a tragedy, because I clung to my Bible. I clung to my faith and my scripture and trying to make sense of it all and why and how. And at the end of the day, you're not going to get those answers, but you're going to find peace and comfort in that process. And some of my greatest relationships have developed as a result of this tragedy. And they're not, again, I can't do anything about the past. It happened, as my mother always says, it is what it is. But these relationships that I have now, I would not have had. And so I really am thankful that you can find the blessings in all of the darkness.
Well said. Very beautiful. So the last question, was there a song or a quote, perhaps a scripture, that got you through the days that seemed just a day to survive?
Well, I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and there is a C.S. Lewis quote that, and I alluded to it earlier, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And life is hard, right? And we have bad things happen, and sometimes to no fault of our own, but we are fully in control of, from that point forward, how we create our own lives. And for me, I didn't want to be a victim for the rest of my life. My sister was murdered. Poor me. I gave up my teaching career. I gave up my life as I knew it. Poor me. It would be easy to have a victim mentality, but that's not a healthy way. And I think for me, that C.S. Lewis quote is beautiful because it gives you freedom in letting go of what happened. It empowers you about how to move forward into your future. And I love that.
Thank you so much for sharing the story. It's been such an honor to watch and to be there at the beginning and, as a journalist and be right in your space and to watch those moments with your family and to see how it's turned out and that it's not done yet and that you have the opportunity to now have your next chapter, whatever that may be. So I really appreciate you sharing it.
Well, Christy, I just have to say to you, when you asked about us telling our story, I don't know that we would have had it not been Christy Peel. Meeting you was one of those blessings. And you and your heart and your compassion and your professionalism and the way that you treated me and my family with your utmost care and respect. I don't know, Christy, if we could have told our story to anyone else. And I really mean this. Thank you so much for being who you are and helping us through one of the darkest times of our lives. I appreciate you very much.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Now I'm crying. Thank you. It was wonderful to watch it and inspiring, and I feel like that was a blessing for me as well. And in thinking about, Vicki's story, the blessings that are there in the tragedy and being accepting to see the blessings, being accepting of the help, being willing to look for joy in the darkest days and believing that there is a better ending, a better way to get through it. And my hope is that Vicki's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out flipyourscriptpodcast.com for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and information about our other great episodes.